Demand planners have the lowest level of satisfaction of anybody in the supply chain. When I do the talent work every year and I ask about satisfaction, they are at the bottom. And I've watched in my decades of being in the practice that we have made it very political. And when I ask the question of what is the role of the forecast in most organizations, they can't answer me. And I see this scramble to try to get perfect on imperfect data, and I think about how silly this all is, right? Because demand by definition has error. And I'm going to ask you today to think about a concept of democratization of planning. How do we help the Allysons, and Allison's going to be my next speaker, to be far more effective globally and not just have an Allyson be a demand planner, but have the whole back office actually have access to planning data and to be able to drive insights. I liken it a lot to the weather, right? When I was a child growing up in West Virginia, you know, back when we had the black and white TVs with the rabbit ears and we put aluminum foil on the rabbit ears, you guys don't remember all that, but, you know, we used to have this discussion of there was going to be a hurricane that was going to hit southeast U.S. Nobody knew where it was going to be. We didn't have patterns, right? And then we would read in the news what happened with the hurricane. Well, 15 years later, we had these weather people that got on the news, and we were flying into the hurricane, and we were starting to predict patterns. Maybe it's path A, maybe it's path B. But over time, we've gotten far more accurate about probabilities and patterns and simulation, so that now we almost know to the minute when we're going to have a storm. And we not only know what's happening, but we know the probabilities of the paths that could have happened, and we know what the next outcome is. And in my mind, when I think about Supply Chain 2030, I'm thinking that the Allysons of the world become more like weathermen, that they are weatherwomen, right? That they are looking at simulations and patterns, and we know nonsensical discussions about making imperfect data perfect, and that they lead teams to drive better outcomes, and that we have democratization of data. So it isn't just the planners, which are 3% of the back office, who have access to planning data, but we have access of planning data for the business leaders, for people in support groups, and it's usable. So I want us to really shift our frame of thinking about planning to think about that we're going to be forecasting outcomes and that we are going to be perhaps democratizing data, and that we're not just going to focus on engines of stale data giving input to an engine which gives us output, but we're going to really drive outcomes, really combining policies and rules and engines. Our traditional supply chain planning systems are all about engines, they're all about math. Policies and rules are not connected to the engines, and we don't connect them to decision support very well. So I want us to think about planning not as it is today, but decisions that could be made through analytics in the future. So in my mind, it becomes a lot like the weather. So I want to introduce you to Allyson Hatfield. I've actually run into Allyson twice in my career. I was surprised to see her previously at a different food manufacturer, but she has been at several manufacturers, and she has a MBA in decision analytics from Georgia State University, and she says she generates her most clever ideas on long runs training for her next marathon. So ask her what her clever idea is from a run this morning. And she works at Mars Petcare, which is not far down the road. And I love going to Mars Petcare because they always have the animals in the office, and anybody that knows me knows I love dogs and cats. And she has been a leader at Mars Petcare in not only demand planning, but demand sensing and looking at use of outside-in data. And originally, when we thought about this conference, we were going to go on tours. So the concept was we were going to take a tour to the Lexington plant for Schneider, and we were going to take a tour to Mars, and we were going to talk to that whole team that worked on outside-in planning. But COVID happens, and we can't do that. But Allyson was gracious enough to say, let me come and talk about the world of demand planning and how we improve the satisfaction of demand planners and how we can better support demand planning. So Allyson, come up, and we look forward to your presentation. Let's give Allyson a hand. Clever idea on a run, eh?
What's funny is my next race is actually next weekend in Boise, Idaho. I'm doing the Idaho Famous Potato Marathon. So yes, a lot of my ideas come from my long runs. So today I'd like to talk with you about reflections of a demand planning lifer. I hesitated using the word lifer because my first thought is a prison inmate that's in for life. And it's really not that bad. I'm very passionate about demand planning and am thrilled that that's where my career landed me. So a little bit about me. As Laura mentioned, I have a vast experience across a variety of CPG companies, product portfolios, seasonality profiles, demand patterns. Right now, I'm the demand planning functional expert at Mars Petcare. As the functional expert, I'm responsible for ensuring that the systems are running smoothly, that they're reliable, that they're performing as expected, and that they best support the business needs. I'm on a broader continuous improvement team, so I'm working with the business to evaluate our current business processes, identify areas where we can improve them, make them better, and then ensure that the systems support those business processes. Previously, I've worked with Campbell's. I was on their new product development team, which was a very exciting opportunity, lots of great learnings there. Launching a lot of new brands, and if you're familiar at all with new product forecasting, it is one of the most difficult things to do. So we had a lot of learnings there. Also worked with Pfizer Consumer Healthcare, managing the Kroger account and the over-the-counter business, so Advil, Robitussin, Chapstick. Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, managing the Home Depot account, lawn care products, Ortho, Roundup. Interesting seasonality patterns there. I'm still impacted every spring when you get that first warm weather weekend. I think, oh, everybody's rushing to Home Depot. I hope they have inventory. And then the Pillsbury Company, which was actually one of my favorite roles because I managed the refrigerated baked goods category on the Walmart account. So when we unveiled the shape cookies, cutout cookies, I worked with Walmart to develop the distribution plan on how we were going to introduce those to stores, and went from a one-time, oh, Christmas holiday, this is a great idea, to every possible holiday we now have these cutout cookies. So how are we going to change our forecast? What's our plan to accommodate this now ongoing, not a one-time, one-off kind of product? So I've had great opportunities throughout my career to learn and be challenged by demand planning. I'm also a certified supply chain professional from Apex and an advanced certified professional forecasting. And I'm very proud of that advanced part because it was very difficult to pass those last two exams with the Institute of Business Forecasting. Very much statistically driven, a lot of memorization of variables and things. So it's fun to have those letters after my name. Worked hard for those. So throughout my lustrous career in demand planning, what have I learned? That's what I want to share with you today. Starting off, the demand planning team. To really have a successful team, it's best to have a tiered and structured team. You want to promote growth and development within your planners, give them the opportunity to learn from one another's experiences, as well as go through a situation, determine how best to improve it, use that experience to continuously improve your processes so that you can improve. I do believe a demand planner can be molded, that they don't necessarily need to have a math or statistics background. if they have a simple understanding of supply and demand, then they can be an excellent demand planner. The on-site learning of how product flows, how retailers handle their data, how they handle their product to get it to the consumers, how consumers respond to those, all of those processes can be learned while you're on the job. So personally, I think demand planning is a great opportunity for someone that has a curious mind and an interest in how things work to come in. They can start off as an analyst, really understand the process flows, utilize the system, and then grow within the team to become a planner, to become a senior planner. Then you've got a team of knowledge and experienced people that can mentor new employees, as well as continuously improve all of your processes and make sure that your demand plan is as accurate as possible. As Laura mentioned, data. Data is big. We've got lots of data available to us. Plethora of data, so much so that at times you're like, with all this data, what do I need to be doing with it? Data is the foundation from which all things are built. So you want to make sure that you've got clean data, reasonable data, accurate data, whole data, not missing parts. That data, you've got orders, shipments, point of sale, customer inventory, customer forecast, customer order forecast, customer point of sale forecast. There's so many options to choose from. You want to make sure that you're using your data to the best that you can, but don't limit yourself to just using that data. 2 years ago, shipments might have been a great indicator of what would be prediction of your future demand. Nowadays, after all the spikes, erratic customer order behavior, stockpiling, now actual orders, but not real orders because there might be some pent-up demand. So maybe you just need half of orders, half of shipments. That's the fun part, in my opinion, of demand planning, is once you get this data, you need to work with it to determine what's best going to work to develop your most accurate plan. One of my favorite of all times, an inquisitive mind is more valuable than a statistical model. Now, I know some of you might be saying, what? No, statistical model, that's going to be accurate. Data in, it's going to get my output. But now look at how we've had with COVID, all the unprecedented things that have happened recently. The statistical model doesn't understand what all that erratic behavior was. So how can it interpret the future or predict the future if there's so much variability in the past? An inquisitive mind where the planner actually asks, do we know why that happened? What was driving that? What was the rationale behind that? Can I explain that? Do I think that's going to happen again? Can I notice that there's talks about another, and I hate to have this as the topic, but there's another outbreak coming so that we're going to have another stockpiling because people are going to want to stay at home more. Understanding and asking those questions, working with their cross-functional partners about, hey, what kind of insight do you have to this? What are you seeing in the marketplace? Is there something our competitors are doing that's driving a decrease in our demand? Is there anything that we're doing that's causing an increase in our demand? Is this an anomaly? Asking those questions and wanting to understand the why behind the what is invaluable when it comes to developing your demand plan. And encouraging that inquisitive mind and fostering that inquisitive mind will really build a great demand planning team and an excellent forecast output for your organization. It's okay to be wrong. Forecast is never going to be 100% accurate. What's really important, though, is that we understand where the gap was. Why was it wrong? Because I can take those learnings and then apply it forward. And I feel that in organizations today, there's the pressure on demand planning on having the absolute accurate number. Well, the forecast is wrong. The forecast is wrong. Hate to break it to you guys, the forecast is always going to be wrong. Even best in class, we're talking 70, 80% accuracy at the item location level. There's going to be errors in the forecast. What's important is that I understand what's driving that. Is it a shift in customer strategy? Is it a global pandemic? Is it anything else in the world that's going on? What is driving the error in the forecast? Did I have the wrong assumptions in what the customer was going to take for our new product launch? Have they decided that they're not going to list it in as many stores? Understanding what drove the error will help you then better assess and put together a better plan moving forward. So as leaders with demand planning, understanding and building or fostering that culture of it's okay to be wrong. We just need to learn from what went wrong so that we can build that. Have that after action review. So, yes, that was great. We launched that new item. Glad to see that it's on shelf. What did we learn from how we put together the plan? How can we do this better next time? Another fun one. Technology doesn't fill the capability gap, but unreliable systems will widen it. There's some really great technology out there. Technology that will actually basically forecast for you, do all the work, and just give you an output as a starting point. But a lot of times, planners are intimidated by that. I think I'm just going to go back to my Excel spreadsheet because that's what I understand. So if you have an opportunity, back to that growth and development, to work on building capabilities with your planners so that they feel more comfortable with what the technology is providing, that they understand what's driving that output, then you've actually taken advantage of the systems that you've put in place. So don't rely on technology to cover that gap in capability that you may have with your planners. Focus on building and developing their capability, whether it be through industry certifications like Apex or IBF. Make sure that they have an understanding of what's driving their forecast, that they're okay if anything's wrong, as long as you learn from it. Ask a lot of questions, get the information you need, build that capability so then they feel more comfortable using their systems. On the flip side of it, if you have a system that is unreliable and your planners are spending a ton of time fighting that system, trying to figure out how to use it, why is it not doing what I want? Why is it not giving something that I understand? That is going to distract them for where they really need to be putting their focus, asking the questions, understanding what's going on with the business, building their forecast. Don't want to have unreliable systems take away from the true value that your planners bring to the team and to the forecast. Everybody loves demand planning until something goes wrong. And then it's always demand planning's fault. No matter what went wrong, whether it happened downstream, upstream, whatever, it's always demand planning and the forecast. The forecast is wrong. Even though we accept, hey guys, we know the forecast is wrong. We're doing everything we can to make it better. It's still always going to be our fault, and we need to fix it. So as leaders, anytime that you can support, promote, explain to the other leaders in your organization, this is what demand planning is doing. We're working through a global pandemic. We're working with marketing and sales to understand what retailers are doing. But guess what? Sometimes they change their mind or they do things differently. So right now, we're doing everything we can to gather those inputs, figure out how to add them in to our plan, and give you the most accurate picture of what we're expecting to happen in the future. You want to educate the other leaders in the organization so they're aware of what you're doing. Get them on board in their alignment. Hey, do you have any insights? Do you have a perspective? Should we be adding some volume for some recession or taking away because we expect this to happen, that to happen? What kind of marketplace dynamics should we consider? Make everyone understand that the forecast, even though it's managed and prepared by demand planning, we all own it because we all contributed to it. We have inputs and valuable information that can go into building that plan. And celebrate the wins. Big wins, little wins, and not just metrics. Because you can have a metric target, but not get close to that metric. But I still may have had dramatic improvements. We've got less obsolete inventory because I got my pipe fill right for this product launch. We have less obsolete inventory that's hanging out or outdated that had to be written off because our forecast has been steadily getting better. Or I'm working and partnering more with my supply chain partner so that we're keeping lower levels of inventory because we know that there's higher variability in our forecast. Things like that, celebrating those wins, acknowledging, giving them a little pat on the back will go a long way because otherwise it's a pretty thankless job and we're always at fault. And then, of course, last but not least, the forecast will never be 100% correct. The goal should always be to make it less wrong. I know that we've got metrics and focusing on hitting that target of accuracy, but accuracy doesn't always capture the work and the effort that went into it and the learnings that came about. So, for example, when I was on the new product, forecasting new products, the first year we were managing the brand, my accuracy was 1%. 1%. That means I was 99% wrong. That was pretty disheartening. But from that, we evaluated what went wrong, documented our assumptions, and said, all right, here's along the way what happened, why we were wrong, why we were off. In year 2, we're launching another new brand. All right, guys, here's what I learned from that first one that didn't go so well. How can we do this better? Here's the process. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to partner with all of our cross-functionals to get their buy-in so that we're holding hands as we come up with our forecast number. We wanted to do everything we could to make it less wrong, knowing that it wasn't going to be exactly accurate because it's hard to, pinpoint that. But we know it's going to be less wrong. And I'm happy to say in our second year, we actually exceeded industry benchmarks and we got 65% accuracy. So that's a significant progress from 1% to 68. Still didn't hit our target of 75, but that's another conversation for another day. And that's what I have for you today.
So Allyson, how long have you been a demand planner?
Long.
Like a number?
So technically it's been 20 plus years.
Okay. So the average tenure of a demand planner in the space is 2.5 years. So only 3% of companies have a career track like Allyson's talking about, where demand planners move through and they have changes where they can have more responsibility.
So what I would say on that, if you look at my career, though, I've stayed within an organization, though, for on average probably 3.5 years. So that's where that growth and development, because I would like to stay in the same company, but for that additional challenge and that growth opportunity, I found that was more opportunity for me to change companies than to stay within a company.
So why is that? I was going to ask you that next. You change jobs like every 3.5 years, right?
Yes.
Did it come about in a run? Or, what drove you to change so much?
So really it was the growth potential and the development opportunities. So I was very fortunate to enter organizations just as they were either building their demand planning or deciding to enter into the space of new products, getting outside their comfort zone. Like with Campbell Soups, they wanted to get outside of the soup aisle. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting. What are you doing? So having that opportunity to get in when there's something new to be defined and built, that gives you that challenge of how are we going to establish our forecasting processes, our S&OP and consensus alignments. Having that opportunity was where the development and the growth and the excitement was. And then once you get things stabilized and they're moving along fine, you're like, okay, I can take on a couple of side projects. Okay, so what's next? And then you get lured away by another company that's like, hey, you're doing great things. Why don't you come over and help us?
So what are the characteristics of a good leader that you experienced on that journey?
So definitely showing the support, because I think there's a lot of functions in the organization that have a little understanding of what demand planning does. And like I said, demand planning is always the fault for anything that goes wrong. So I think a great leader is one that can, I hate to say defend demand planning, but defends demand planning. It promotes what they're doing and the activities and the time that they're investing into developing the plan, and giving you that support throughout the organization. And also, one of the best leaders I loved working for, they trusted that I knew what I was doing. They wanted to understand, and they'd ask questions like, oh, so, what went into those assumptions, or how did you define that? Why do you think that is where the forecast is going? They wanted to understand it, but they trusted that I was the expert in what I was doing. And I was empowered to own my forecast, and I felt, of course, responsible for it. And here's what's going into it. I'm getting my inputs. Not sure I believe in that one. I think this one, definitely 100%. This one we're going to go 50-50. But I took all of that into my plan, and they were like, that's a great plan. So tell me about it.
How do you train people to understand forecasting? In your jobs that you had, how many of your leaders understood forecasting?
So that's a fun question, because
they're all waiting for the answer here, right?
I don't think it's necessary to go through like the day-to-day, what are you doing scrubbing your data? Where do you pull your data from? But just having a conversation to understand the thought process that goes into the development of your forecast. But then also asking, are you having any pain points? If you're spending more time fighting a system than gathering your inputs or doing your analysis to feel comfortable in the forecast that you developed, that's not very productive. So actually spending the time to understand the steps that they're taking to develop their forecast. Is the business process working? Do you feel like you're going to meetings and actually getting good information, or do you feel like you're spinning your wheels and wasting your time? How can we change that so that it's more fruitful? How can we make the best use of your time so that you feel that ownership over your forecast because you've had the time to do the analysis to gather the inputs?
So if I had a magic wand and I said 5 things I would like for demand planning leaders to know, the bosses of Allyson, it would be forecastability, coefficient of variation that looks at just what's possible. Forecast value add, am I driving improvement or not? Bias and organizational bias as we go through the process. The ability to understand the world of gray and probability of demand versus focusing on the absolute nature, and continuous learning.
Yes.
What do you think about Laura's 5, and what would you add to the list?
I feel like they're pretty comprehensive, understanding the area of gray, but also feeling comfortable in it. Because when I think about the personality traits of a great demand planner, that inquisitive mind is definitely there. They have to have a strong backbone, thick skin, because you're going to take some...
Bring it on, right?
Yes, exactly.
High-heavy politics.
And that can be tough at times because we all want to do a good job. But that willingness to experiment. We have plenty of data, but that doesn't mean you're going to have a definitive, this is the direction you should go, this is how it should be. So at times you just have to wing it. Oh, see, yep, that's a good starting point. Nope, didn't work. Let me try this one. You have to feel comfortable with that failure for that growth and that development. So, I feel that they're pretty comprehensive, the two.
All right, well, good. Now, there's confusion in the industry and within organizations on the role of the budget and the role of the forecast. And some people say we should connect the two. And I don't think so.
I completely agree with you on that one.
Because the budget's wrong when it's first published, and it has a lot of financial bias around bonuses, and it'll never be market-driven. So how do you deal with this political nature of what is a forecast?
So I know that there's that push to drive that one number. And of course, the budget, I feel like, is one of those, our target or budget. One number, this should be it, right? But really, the demand plan, I feel like, is what's used to validate or identify your risk and opportunities against whatever your target or your budget is. And it's better to know what kind of gap or overage you're going to have that then you have to work with. So having that realistic versus target is how you would want to use those two.
I always say that a consultant that says there's one number doesn't understand demand planning, right? Because there's a common plan, and we're going to use the demand plan to educate the financial plan. And, so it's so funny when I travel the world and I listen, I want one number. And I'm like, yeah, if you want one number, you're going to go right off the cliff. Let's roll some mics and ask Allyson some questions. Peter's got a mic. This is Peter Balsdorf, and Peter used to be with APIX, but now it's ASCM, and you graduated from his class.
Congratulations. So I'm going to ask you for a forecast.
All right.
Right? So
I'm good at making those up.
Here's the forecast. So when we do job task analysis every year to kind of figure out what goes on the exams and then what goes into the learning part of all of our certifications, one of the trends that we've seen is this collapse of the various function in materials management, demand planning, supply planning, distribution requirements planning. So if you were to forecast by 2030 kind of where demand planning sits and how that might aggregate itself into supply chain planning or something like that, I would love your insight on that journey. Because I'm guessing if you're leaving someplace to do every 3.5 years, there's probably that kind of a role somewhere out there in the future.
So what's funny is that I thought about talking about where demand planning sits in the organization in my presentation, but to me it all boils down to, it doesn't really matter where demand planning sits, because ultimately their objective is to develop an unbiased forecast that's fact and data driven with the judgmental piece layered on. So whether they're under sales or under supply chain, ideally by 2030, it would be end-to-end planning, and we would all be integrated together without the silos and, demand planning's doing this, and then they pass it over to supply planning. Like, no, we all work together, because guess what? We're all in this together. If I don't get this piece right, you don't do your piece right, and then we don't get that right, then we don't hit the target, we don't make our bonus. So it's really all integrated, but
it's not.
But it's not.
And the other thing I find is a lot of times people will say, well, let's just put demand and supply together as a planner. But I find that demand planning is about the important and supply planning is about the urgent. And if you put urgent and important together, you always will do urgent. Because I think demand planning really requires you to think about the data patterns, the data has to speak to you, running the models, having the conversations. And if you're always answering the phone about where's my shipment, you'll never get to that work.
I would absolutely agree with that. The demand planners need to be focused more in the long term and what's going to be happening, not what's happening today, what's our current crisis.
Okay, another question. Madhav.
Forward 5 years, right? If I think about demand planner skill set, this part of it is statistical and hard math. Part of it is collaboration and consensus building. Fast forward 5 years, where do you see the tilt? Is it more towards the collaboration and consensus, or how important are the hard math skills to do the demand planner's job?
Honestly, I think technology is evolving at such a pace that less and less will we need the hard math skills. As long as you've got excellent Excel skills, you should be fine. Because I let technology do that hard work for me. But I think also, though, as we move forward, these black swan events, things that we have to account for, the data the output from the statistical engines are only as good as the input. So we still need the art to how to massage and cleanse that data that's going into my engine so that it can then give me a good output. So as much as I'd like to say there could be slight tilts between the art and science of it, they still need to be balanced.
Now, Allyson, you use advanced tools in the world, technologies, yet you still use Excel spreadsheets.
Absolutely.
And why?
So part of that is the capability and the comfort level, understanding what's driving the engine, how it's determining its forecast. And what's interesting is that we asked our planners, what would you like to see if we could give you anything you want? And they're like, I really hate stat modeling. I would love not to be doing that. What we did, figured out how to have stat modeling done for them. And now they're like, I don't know why the engine's doing it. I want to get in there and play with the stat model. But you didn't before you had to. So now that you don't have to, you want to.
But do you think by 2030 we can evolve to where the technology is useful and to the degree we don't need Excel spreadsheets?
I'd like to think so. But again, it's where the comfort level is. So how you train and build the capability of your planners to be comfortable with the technology, then they can step away from the Excel spreadsheets. But it's one of those that, I see what you're saying, but let me get that data, dig into it, and really immerse myself in it so that I feel like I understand it. That's the desire to go back to the Excel spreadsheets, to just kind of validate, double check, make sure I'm understanding it, because I can do this in Excel. And okay, yes, I'm with you on that. That makes sense.
Is it because of the way the engines are so structurally encased in IT that the demand planners can't get to it to do that what-if analysis and fine-tuning?
Yes, because if they can't explain it, they feel uncomfortable with it, and that uncomfortable is what they need to find an answer for.
So if there's a way that we can improve the comfortability, because it was interesting in my pandemic research, everyone turned off their demand planning tools and they came back to Excel, and it was because it was so encased in a structural batch job, and they had historic data feeding historically tuned engines that we couldn't really use their systems. So we have some questions from our online. So let's talk to our online group. What are the tools that are the most beneficial to you in your career?
So honestly, I would say Excel, because you can never go wrong with Excel. And really, it's going to sound cheesy, but my inquisitive mind, I feel like using my mind to ask questions and wanting to understand, even questions that to someone else may not exactly make sense, like what are we doing to drive awareness of this new product? Because that's going to impact the takeoff, which is going to impact the replenishment from the DC, which is going to impact when my replenishment order is going to be. Everything's connected. So anytime I can gain some insight to a part of the process, then I can better manage my forecast for what I expect is going to happen. So really, I think it's that wanting to seek to understand all the elements of what's going on. And then also working with your cross-functional partners to understand what they're doing and how that impacts your demand plan.
Now, the demand planner will often sit in between finance, manufacturing, and sales, which are three different tensions. And I've seen that demand planners need to have good influence, good communication skills. Can you talk about how you navigate those differences and what you've learned around managing yourself and managing those conversations?
So personally, I think it's fun to kind of be the middleman across that. You get a little bit of exposure to what each function's priorities are, how they approach the business. And as the middleman, you get to translate their language to the other functions. So you get to be Switzerland, but also the translator to say, all right, sales is looking at this in dollars, supply needs it in units, finance wants it in another type of dollars. So the ability to bridge and have the bring the common ground between the two, that's really where the demand planner is key. So
what's an important skill to do that? What do we need to train people in terms of skill set to be successful there? Because it's very different than tuning engines and hardcore math.
Very true. So that would be the clear communication, making sure that they're able to understand what's being said, ask the right questions to truly get to the root question or inquiry, and then being able to translate and talk between two different groups.
So one of my observations about you, Allyson, and working is you manage yourself very well in a conversation and you don't get mad. You know, so when...
That took a lot of time to develop, by the way.
But let's talk about that, because, you know, when the darts are flying and the friction and you're wrong, how do you manage yourself? Because you just sit there and smile and keep asking those smart questions.
The way that I like to think about it, it's kind of building that bridge of trust. You can definitely tell me I'm wrong now. And, you know, it's probably not the best time to remind you, well, I did suggest we do it this way, which was closer to being right, but you disagreed with me. So I take the opportunity to say, all right, you're right, this was wrong. So what did we learn from it? How can we take that next time so that when we have the conversation in the future that's similar, I can say, you know, when we went back to this, I did the post review of it. And here's what we should have learned from that. I'd like to take that and apply it here so that now we can do it better and it won't go wrong and be my fault again.
You don't personalize it.
Yes, very true.
And I often see the demand planners personalize. What do you mean, right? Any other questions? Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Allyson. I actually ran a demand planning team now maybe 12, 15 years ago at Conagra. And you know, a lot of tools, a lot of analytics. When you look back over the 20 years, beyond Excel kind of going to 5.0 and getting more lines, like, are there any things that you've seen in that 20 years that are actually have changed the way the planners work? Any data sets or any new things that you've seen come on that have helped make that job more fun or more effective?
So I do love the best fit capabilities within a system, because then it can do a lot of that trial and error thinking for me. So give me the best fit of what model will look best given the data set that we've got. Nope, I don't know if I like that. Then I can play around with it. But knowing that this high-tech intelligent engine is going to do all of the work of deciding what's the best algorithm to develop the best forecast, I love that option.
This question came from online. I remember when Excel spreadsheets were listed on a resume that they were really good at Excel. Do you think Python will be a skill in the future?
I'm not sure what Python is.
Yeah, that's an important discussion for us to have, right? Okay, so we'll get to that in our next discussion. So,
what a great segue that is.
Any other questions for Allyson? Yes, Bill.
So the question is related to forecast value add that Laura mentioned. It's powerful but rarely implemented. Have you had much success implementing that? Have you done similar things? Any ideas there? Because I think arbitrary accuracy thresholds are frustrating for everybody, right? Like,
And
is
useless.
70 good? Is 80 or 90?
Yeah,
or 20?
useless.
Completely agree with that. And as a side note, I think the best example of using the accuracy metric to drive improvement was when we decided, instead of having a flat target for demand planning, was by brand an improvement target, so that you had a baseline of where they were, and then say, I want you to, based on the complexity of the business, have an accuracy improvement of 5 points, 8 points, 10 points. To me, that was a brilliant way to motivate planners and actually have them an achievable goal to attain. As for FBA, honestly, the more recently is the first time that I've used it. And I think there's a lot of flaws in how to measure it, because what I want it to capture is, or to tell me, is how valuable was it, the time it took for me to do this manual step and influence the forecast, versus if I hadn't, was it worthwhile for me to spend that time? And right now, our capability with our data doesn't allow us to measure it in a way that I think really captures where I want it to capture it. It'll do, generally speaking, here's where we're manually adjusting it overall. Doesn't necessarily say it took me 5 different manual adjustments to get it to where it was. And that's what I would like it to get to, the level of detail too. So on one hand, it does provide feedback of, yes, you making those, adding that judgment piece to it and making those changes is adding value because you did get accuracy gains. But I think it would show less of a gain if it knew how many times I touched it to get it there.
So a measure of work input
Yes.
and the value from the work input. So right now, I think I love forecast value add, but it's really much more about the math, not necessarily how much labor input. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to make this easier for the demand planners. Okay, do we have any other questions? So we keep getting them from online. Love it, guys. Bring it on. Deanna. So Allyson, while she's getting the mic, are you using demand sensing? The answer to that is yes. You've used it a couple of times, right? And are you using external data? And
Yes.
the answer is yes. And what would you say about demand sensing?
I think demand sensing is a great tool because it focuses on the short term, and it takes all the data pieces that point of sale, customer inventory, things that as an individual planner would be a whole lot to try to pull together to come up with an answer. So I really like that it's taking all of those inputs and determining in my short term when it should be really accurate, because it also has a view of orders. Here's where your product needs to be so that you can get it fulfilled. I think it's a great tool.
Was it useful in the pandemic?
It also, as I think all statistical modeling had, it also had that kind of lag response of like, whoa, what is all this? This is unexpected, didn't know. But because it has the benefit of seeing the order, then all of a sudden its forecast changes to match the order.
Uh-huh.
Well, if I could change my forecast once I see the order, I would have great accuracy too. So.
Okay. Dina?
Yeah, actually, that's, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually where I was going to go next on demand sensing, because I was just curious, Allyson, in your career, have any of those stints been focused on a continuous replanning cycle, and kind of what's your vision of that? Because that's really hard to keep up with all those data points, right, with your Excel files. I was just curious how I'll call resiliency and just the response to just risk towers and, and your real-time data feeds coming in, what your thought was in that space.
So the focus for at least demand planning is more of the long-term forecast. So we have one data input that goes to building our statistical models, but then validating what our final output is once we add in our judgmental piece. That's where I would bring in the more external, like point of sale, customer inventory, because that'll tell me whether or not the plan that I have is a really valid, realistic plan. I also use it a lot more so for the post-evaluation. So we under-delivered. What happened? Oh, because it looks like they're holding too much inventory, or they've changed their inventory strategy and they're burning. So having visibility and using that external data to help determine what was wrong with the forecast previously, I found is very helpful.
But I would say that my experience is often people will go after the tools, but not answer the question, what's the role of the forecast in each of the horizons? So the role of the forecast varies by industry. If you're just in a distributor model, the role of the forecast is to drive inventory. If you're in a manufacturing world, the role of the forecast is to drive a feasible plan and demand translation for procurement. But I think a lot of times people will get into this without really thinking, what is the role of the forecast and what does good look like? And as we became more reactive in the pandemic, we looked at how do we become real-time? Demand planning should never be real-time. Demand planning is about tactical and about operational and about looking at patterns in market data, right? Okay, last question. And okay, we got another question? Okay.
Yeah. So
Sean.
It was interesting that you mentioned that it's an inquisitive mind, right, that drives the plan. Have you ever wondered, is it the lack of technology executed in the system?
I think it's the exact opposite, actually. Okay. It's not anything with the system. It's more so that judgmental piece, because the system can only forecast based on what has happened in history. But as we know, the marketplace dynamics, consumer dynamics, they change often. You've got new product listings. It's going to steal away from your existings. There's so many things going on that you'll only get that information by asking questions from your sales team, your supply partners, your marketing. That's where the inquisitive mind of wanting to understand what's going on in the world and in the marketplace, that you can then help the system and say, oh, you knew what was going on based on the past, but here's the things that are going on in the world that's different, and that's what I need to add to my plan in order to really have a good plan.
So the science will never completely eliminate the art.
Absolutely.
And I think often people with a technology bent think that this is all about science. I think really great demand planners really understand the business. They are inquisitive. They're really looking at the patterns, and they're really owning that. And this blend of art and science, we will never, I think, totally automate that.
I mean, the pandemic and the recent, well, I guess last couple of years now, if anything, that goes to show how the science needs the art to help complement, because there's just things, there's no way the science would be able to predict or respond quick enough to.
So Allyson, the two best read blog posts on my blog are give your demand planner some love today, and the fact that demand planners are the least satisfied. What would love look like?
I mean, I really feel like love is just a simple, way to go. I'm acknowledging the time that you're spending on building this good plan, and you're doing a great job. Thanks.
And then the second best read blog post that I have ever written is about IT standardization and technology for the sake of technology. And, when people are just purely putting in tools, they really don't help their people and their teams. Any thoughts there?
I think technology is great, and I definitely think organizations benefit from technology. However, you don't want to have the Ferrari of technology, but your people are only able to handle a Volvo. You need to make sure...
Or ride a bike.
Or ride a bike.
Yeah.
You really want to make sure that they are comfortable and capable of using the technology you're implementing. Otherwise, what are you really getting? A very expensive, pretty looking system that's not.